Democratic Congresswoman Rashida Tlaib of Michigan has a history of being outspoken about her principles. Back in 2016, long before she became a member of Congress, she was part of a group of women who staged a protest against Donald Trump at a campaign speech in Detroit, Michigan. That's her in the middle. She was escorted out of that event. Last year, she went on to run for Congress and won, becoming one of the first two Muslim American congresswomen. Shortly after she was sworn in, literally on the same night, Congresswoman Tlaib was caught on camera promising to impeach the president in words I cannot repeat right now on TV. When what she said all but dominated the news cycle, she made no apologies. Quote, I will always speak truth to power. And she hasn't backed down since. Yesterday, Congresswoman Tlaib and Ilhan Omar were blocked from entering Israel at the urging of President Donald Trump. For Tlaib, that trip was going to include a visit to her grandmother, who is from the occupied West Bank. She lives there. Well, today, the Israeli government changed course. They said that Tlaib could come if she agreed in writing not to promote boycotts against Israel during the trip. Congresswoman Tlaib initially agreed, then changed her mind, saying she would not be silenced. Here with me now, someone who's been closely following Donald Trump as he increasingly leans toward authoritarianism and who has been following this story as it continues to develop. Mehdi Hasan is a columnist at The Intercept and the host of Upfront on Al Jazeera. Mehdi, look, the irony of the Rashida Tlaib stuff is that at some point a few weeks ago, the president said, yes, send them back. Rashida Tlaib's from Detroit, but her parents are actually from Palestine. She was going back, and then he told Israel to stop her. Colin Kahl, former deputy assistant to President Obama, said that Trump can't even keep his racist demands straight. What do you make of this mess?
Surprise, Donald Trump has no consistency or principles. What do I make of the mess, Ali? Two big takeaways. Number one, the president of the United States, who styles himself as a great patriot, nationalist, wants to make America great again, wants to stick up for America in the world, allies with a foreign government in order to throw two duly elected members of the United States Congress under the bus, simply because they are women of color, they are Muslims, and they are strong critics of his. Doesn't care about the fact that they're members of the United States Congress. Allies with the Netanyahu government say, yeah, don't let them in. Outrageous, unprecedented. Even AIPAC comes out and says this is not a good move. Number two, the other big takeaway,
by the way,
Ali,
which has been very clear about the fact that they are not on the same side as Rashida Tlaib.
Not at all. Not at all. They're very much on
Israel. Yeah,
they're very much on Netanyahu's side on everything else. But here's the big other takeaway related to Israel and the debate in the United States, which Ilhan Omar and Rashida Tlaib have done so much to kind of highlight, which is this is stark proof, if any more was needed, that the occupation of the West Bank and Gaza is a reality, that the Israelis control the lives, the everyday lives, the freedom of movement, the freedom of speech of ordinary Palestinians, to the extent that a Palestinian American who is a member of Congress wants to come and visit her grandmother, and she's told you must sign a letter giving up your freedom of speech. That's absurd. Even Steny Hoyer, Democrat, who's criticized Ilhan and Rashida, big supporter of Netanyahu, even he came out today and said this is unprecedented.
Yeah, so that would be a problem for anybody. But there's if any American were blocked for a lot of reasons, except that America has given Israel since 1945 in some fashion or other, whether it's deals or direct assistance or military aid, something along the lines of about $143 billion, about $3+ billion last year or in the 2017 fiscal year. Only Iraq and Afghanistan were ahead of Israel in 2017. But historically, no one's even close to Israel as a recipient of American money. Last night, Bernie Sanders was on the show and had a view that maybe this is the opportunity to rethink whether that's a good return on investment. Let's listen to what he said.
Israel doesn't want members of the United States Congress to visit their country to get a firsthand look at what's going on. And I've been there many, many times. But if he doesn't want members to visit, maybe he can respectfully decline the billions of dollars that we give to Israel.
Your take on that? American members of Congress pass and determine that money going to Israel. Two of them got blocked.
So I remember interviewing Bernie Sanders a couple of years ago when he first floated the idea of making U.S. aid conditional on behavior, which it really should be. And by the way, Ali, you mentioned the U.S. gives aid. It's Congress really, that gives that aid. Correct. And it's two members of Congress who are being blocked. Ilhan Omar has said today that we should use U.S. aid as leverage to get Israel to stop violating international law, stop building illegal settlements. Bernie's saying similar things. I'm sure Elizabeth Warren and others will soon follow. What's interesting now is that Netanyahu and Trump have made Israel a deeply partisan and polarized polarizing issue in the United States. They've become the biggest recruiters for the BDS movement, the boycott movement that so annoys them. That's the irony. They've taken this issue and actually energized it. And people who don't like Trump's racism at home are saying, well, why should we ally with Netanyahu's racism abroad? So it's become very much a partisan issue. The Democratic base, which is younger, less white than the rest of the party, is far less pro-Israeli than other generations and other Democrats. All of the polls show that. And it's only going to head in one direction, and not a good direction for Israel, if Israel continues to behave in this illiberal and, yes, racist way. Tim Kaine said today, Prime Minister Netanyahu, lift your Muslim ban. It's Netanyahu's Muslim ban to go with Trump's Muslim ban.
Mehdi, good to see you as always. Thank you. Mehdi Hasan for us now
Thanks,
in Washington.
Ali.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.